equals and maybe compare themselves. I think that's a really good point. I didn't notice that. Could I read really quickly something I added?
Sure.
After the fact, I put in the Webster's dictionary of the word poor, the definition of the word poor, because something that he points out is that there's a moral component to wealth and poverty that we perceive. And I had said that there's assumption that those who are poor, of course we all don't feel this way, but some of us do, poor quote-unquote people are lazy, slatternly, dirty, stupid, and even in many cases criminal. So here's the Webster's definition. Deficient or lacking in something specified, a region poor in mineral deposits, faulty or inferior, as in construction or workmanship, deficient in desirable ingredients, qualities, or the like, poor soil, of an inferior, inadequate, or unsatisfactory kind, poor health, lacking in skill, ability, or training, a poor cook, deficient in moral excellence, cowardly, abject, or mean. So I thought that was interesting that we would call people who have conditions of poverty in their lives poor, because I think we are passing judgment on them, and it's easier to justify our own consumers' choices by saying that we have higher morals.
Any reactions to that? Comments? De Botton actually has a historical take on the changing meaning of the poor and feeling about being poor. It becomes your own fault in modern times, whereas in the old days, the poor could even be more favored by God in a sense, because it would be easier for them to go to heaven, which for most people, rich and poor alike, in those days would have been a real place, as opposed to our times when we see this as at best a metaphor. So indeed, modernity did something peculiar in changing people's attitudes, changing social relations, and creating ideas that are drastically different from pre-modern ideas and justifications and explanations.
It kind of reminded me of Wood a little bit about how she talks about where historically serfs or land, people who worked on the land had that to claim, and they had that tangible thing to claim, and it's similar to historically people who probably didn't have as much material good but maybe had land could claim almost moral superiority because they would go to heaven and they were promised that, and it was like a tangible thing. And so it kind of made me think of the similarities between what Wood is saying historically and I don't know how to say his name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I think the themes are related indeed. And Amy, you were the other person during that dim past.
So
what you read also discusses ideology and ideas.
That's right. So I did the Introduction to World-Class Women, Global Literature, Education, and Feminism, and also Harry Potter, an examination of Harry Potter, Magic in the Markets by Goodman. And we talked a little bit about the fact that both articles sort of discuss changing economic structures within the context of globalization, and how women's positions, both their working positions, but also their positions inside the home have changed, have sort of changed, and so therefore their perceptions have changed, and also the perceptions of women have changed also. And then we also talked a little bit about increases in governmental privatization and the types of labor that women are employed in. And we also talked a little bit about the fact that women still don't have the same forms of education that men do. And we also talked a little bit about there's an uneasy tension between the market forces in which women must enter and also traditional concepts of gender. So those are also being challenged, especially in the developing world. And for Harry Potter, we talked a little bit about Harry Potter as sort of a larger metaphor for the context of globalization and class and social class also. we talked a little bit about some of the aspects of Harry Potter, the Harry Potter novels, and that there are very similar aspects to what we see in reality too. That's about it.
And what struck you the most? What do you think you are taking home after you finish this class?
Yeah, I liked that Goodman talked a lot about, I liked her perceptions of education and also about working class women. I think those are useful because I guess in feminist theory you don't actually read a lot, well I haven't read a lot about what it means for women to be going from the traditional sphere to
In
now.
American feminist theory,
to work.
with some exceptions, I think what you say is true.
Yeah.
In Europe, there is more actually on
Yeah.
the class issue, and certainly in South Asia and Southeast Asia, class is as important as gender in feminist writings.
Right. So yeah, I appreciated her discussion of that, and it made me intrigued.
How about the others? Did you also get intrigued? How many have read Harry Potter novels? How many? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, including me, it would be 6. Okay, not many. Okay, they are fat novels, you know, but they're easy reads actually. It's not. I hope the criticisms would not stop you from reading the novels because they are fun to read. One can criticize things and still read them. You can criticize Shakespeare's attitude towards the blacks in Othello and still recognize this as a great play, as I do. And she's certainly a good writer, not a great writer, but a good writer. Okay, let's go to the third week. Who was here on the third week? Who presented? Somebody must have.
We skipped the 13th.
We
That
skipped
was
on.
when
I
you
was
were-
not here. That's right. Yeah, because
Oh.
you watched Zin and my lectures. Okay, fourth week. Yeah, Michelle.
As you might
Zin?
remember, I presented the People's History of the United States, and my basic reactions were just of the exclusion of the people's history of small heroes, but still important heroes, people that had struggled and advanced. That was very unfortunate that it's not included in typical history textbooks that students are reading. I think it inherently benefits the people that are in power and most of the social class. And I really enjoyed the book. It's different than a typical history book. At least for me, it was able to keep my attention. I don't
And
know
it
if that
has
was
many segments of actual speeches or sayings, oral history, poetry from Langston Hughes and others. Yeah, when you look at this, it's an incredible blend of unconventional sources of historicizing.
And I guess just in general, when I read it, there were certain feelings. Sometimes you'd be like, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe I didn't hear about this. So there's feelings of frustration, but also after you read it, you see that people did succeed, even if history hasn't reported so. So I don't know. I see him as being hopeful of the future, but I also see that he knows that the struggle is difficult and it requires.
So you're not going to sell off your book to a second-hand bookstore?
No, I already have the book anyway.
That's good. Sarah?
How would you take last night's historical
Zin
circumstance?
was actually on Democracy Now! Last night during the session. They quickly interviewed him. Because I think he's one of the
Did you
people
hear
that-
him or?
Yeah, it was just a brief like 2 minute
Okay.
interview. But I can't remember the name of the other gentleman that works here in Denver that was part of the movement with Martin Luther King.
Oh, Vince Harding, yeah.
Yeah,
Vince Harding.
Vince Harding.
Someone else. They interviewed
Mhm.
it wasn't Vince Harding, it was someone else that was with Martin Luther King, and I interviewed him as well. I thought it was so great.
Yeah. Look, there definitely is historic.
Yeah.
And I saw, just by chance, I was actually watching Merce Cunningham's life of dance, and in between I was watching election returns. And during one of those episodes, just when I turned in, Jesse Jackson's face was on the screen.
Oh,
and he
Yeah,
was
I was
crying.
crying.
Yeah.
And that really touched me very deeply.
Yeah.
Well, others, what do you think of Zim? Some of you actually went to see him in Boulder.
He almost fell on me. It's a hallmark of my life.
You still haven't washed your hands, right?
No.
That's really cute. Okay. So let's move on now. Was there a second person? Yes, Marie.
I talked about Professor Kahn's papers on Nosrol and Paz. And basically I read them as a way for us to further illuminate the human experiences of history through our study of human rights. I subtitled my reflection, The Humanization and Human Rights Methodology, which I think pretty much sums up the way I presented it. I talked about how Kahn points out that there's the dichotomy destructed in Paz's later work between the revolution and like leaving room for love in the revolution. I think that's really important, and that you have to make room for what makes us truly human when you try to understand when we diverge from those types of tendencies. I don't really know what to say about it.
Well, I suppose you also inspired me to read part of The Wasteland
Yeah.
in class. So, are you the only lit major in this class? Oh, you're also lit major. Three lit majors in this class. Well, that's not bad. That's the best class I've had so far. That's great. And I think there is some point in introducing these things. And Brett was, you were remarking to me privately that how it took you a bit out of your comfort zone, but still it was worthwhile. Do you have any further thoughts on how to use literature?
No, I don't have anything.
But you're going to read more of it from now on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually inspired me to go back and read The Great Gatsby again because
Okay.
I was telling my the day you read the introduction in The Great Gatsby, I was telling someone about how that was one of the more pivotal books in my life that I read, and it was really neat to just think about that again. And like Brett, it takes me a little bit out of my comfort zone, but it's really worthwhile.
Yeah, well, someday we'll have a society where everybody will be comfortable with art and literature. And in fact, everybody will be an artist. That is my dream. Okay, fifth week. Ryan and Brett. No, Brett was in the sixth week. Okay.
So I did Empire of Capital by Ellen Meekson's Wood, which I'd heard things about imperialism and American imperialism and economic imperialism in general, and just piece here and a piece there and a piece here, but I really liked her book because it was kind of this comprehensive view of economic imperialism. And I liked the stance she took on it. One thing I think that I would be interested to, I like things in context. I like to see the context of things to really understand them, and I don't really know what the academic debate looks like on this topic, and I don't really know where her book, and I mean it's not something I really had a chance to look into very much, where does her book fall in this debate? Because I think it tells more about her opinion and what she's saying and how she's reacting to what other people are saying, because of course this isn't the first work on this topic. So that that's one thing that I'm a little curious about still that I haven't really looked into, but
Any other thoughts?
that's about all I have to say.
Okay. Let's see if others have some similar reaction or similar or answer to your question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you folks think? How did that book strike you? Have you read something like that before coming to this class? You haven't. Okay, so it was kind of new. And are you recovering from the shock of Okay, it might take a while. Yes, Sarah.
I was actually my then boyfriend, no fiance, who doesn't have a background in any of this stuff, but has an interest. He picked it off a bookshelf for me this last summer, and I was reading it in Cambodia and Vietnam, and so I was reading it thinking, oh my God, when I get to grad school, they're not even going to touch on this stuff because
Surprise.
yeah, it's going to be a little out there for.
But probably
you,
nobody else in this building will look at it. That is true.
So yeah, I found it really exciting that I didn't have to buy a book for this class very young, and B, that something I read that was really outside of my perceptions of the whole issue was something that we would explore in school.
Any other thoughts, Michelle?
I just like the historical background that led up to how we are the way we are today. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I learned a lot about the Irish actually reading this book. I didn't know about the River Shannon before I read this book, and I had a lot of interest in Ireland, Irish literature mainly. Did you study Scotch-Irish literature? Irish studies. What do you study in Irish studies?
Joyce, Faulkner,
Synge?
Synge.
Yeah. And there are some, even George Bernard Shaw is Irish, he's Irish Protestant.
James Heaney.
Yes. Heaney actually I met at Cornell.
You did.
Before he won the Nobel Prize.
His Nobel speech is one of my favorite
Really,
pieces of
he's
literature.
a great poet, really. Yeah, so perceptive, and he has such a feel for the English language.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you can touch his words.
Oh yeah.
He really,
Absolutely.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, he truly is an amazing poet.
Yeah.
But imperialism is very relevant to Irish literature and Irish poetry and Irish, W.B. Yeats, like A Terrible Beauty is Born. Without the experience of domination in Ireland, you would never have that line coming from a poet in English language. Or James Joyce in Ulysses, actually. Stephen Dedalus, who is kind of James Joyce's alter ego and the protagonist. Stephen Dedalus is Irish, and he is taught by an English professor. And I don't know if you remember this, any of you, but there is a line there that is just amazing. I mean, he is saying, of course, Joyce is writing in English. He writes better than any person alive, probably, in English language. But Stephen Dedalus, the protagonist, remarks about his professor and about English. That is, and the line is exactly, it is his language before it is mine. It is his language before it is mine. So if you actually dig back into the Irish consciousness, and that they had their own language, Gaelic, before English came, the English actually is the language of the colonizer. It's the language of conquest. And yet people like Joyce appropriate the language and recreate the language and recreate myths and history. And of course Joyce goes much beyond that in Finnegan's Wake, on which I actually have an essay. Unfortunately it's in Bengali. It's actually a critique of Derrida. Derrida wrote an essay called 2 Words on Joyce. And my essay is called 4 Words, Joyce, Derrida, 20th century. So, someday maybe somebody will translate that essay and you can read it. I had a lot of fun. But that's the thing about Irish literature, though. I mean, it is, and all dominating literature, if you really dig into it and read it, Tagore included, you find so much beauty, terrible beauty, so much humor. It is a humor that is born out of suffering. And really a tendency to just to laugh it off, but you cannot laugh it off all the time, you have to fight back. So it's an amazingly complex and multi-layered, richly textured history. And Zinn, again, manages to bring out some of it. But Joyce actually does so much more for the Irish. It's just amazing. Even if you read just his short stories in the Dubliners.
The Dead, yeah.
Yeah, or the portrait of the artist as a young man. It's amazing. Wonderful stuff. Okay, now we can go to,
I spoke also.
who was the other person? You?
Me and
Okay.
that's what spoke. I talked about I went right at the end, and so there weren't a lot of questions, so it'd be kind of nice if some people had any questions or comments this time. Because I thought it was
I'll
pretty
come back to your
interesting.
question, by the way. I haven't answered it yet. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. You answer, because I think there will be similar questions in your presentations too.
And not just, well, basically what Tong, it was The Feminist Ethics by Rosemary Tong, and she goes through all of the different types of approaches to feminist ethics, the feminine, the maternal, the feminist, and the lesbian. And what I took from it, well, first of all, it was really interesting just understanding the distinction between Western and more patriarch dominated ethics, and this new kind of, well, not new, but this different way of thinking about ethics that kind of injects the female perspective. And what I took from it is actually that how she concludes her piece is that there are all these methodologies, there are all these approaches to feminist ethics, but the problem has been that that not one has caught on because they're so disparate still. And her call at the end of the piece was kind of to consolidate these and in order to make the strongest case for feminist ethics being included within Western ethics. And I actually took that and saw a really applicable case to that in a different class that I'm taking, and writing a paper about Latin American females in their rise to political power. And what I've seen is that they're taking these, they've taken two, and they've self-identified two very separate ways of approaching attaining power, which is a more feminine way. We want to pass legislation about children, education, healthcare, and that's why we want to attain political power. And then this other self-proclaimed position of a more feminist approach, which is, this is our right to be in politics in parity with men. We should have equal representation in all levels of government. And I think what's happened is that what I see now with quotas and the different kinds of ways they're trying to gain parity with men, this separation has really damaged their ability to attain political power. And so I'm really taking this paper and thinking about how if they would unify their and present a more unified front in their approach to political power and their identity, they would be more successful. And so that's what I took out of the piece.
Anybody else doing something similar with ideas in that paper? Think that you might? Don't lose it. It might come in handy if you're not going to graduate next term. Yeah, I think that is really quite important to see if some of these ideas are applicable and how to take them beyond the narrow confines of a class and see if they can be applied to real life struggles.
Yeah.
I know you've thought a little bit about grassroots organization and whatnot. How do you feel that fits in with feminism, especially in Latin America?
Latin America, with respect. Gosh, that's a really good question. I think that what I've seen in grassroots organizing is still a real dominant approach by men. And Adrian and I have talked about this a little bit. Both of us have been involved in grassroots organizing. And, you know, I think that it would do women well to kind of unify in their kind of approach to activism in order to kind of face this still kind of male-dominated field. I think that there's still a strong reaction to feminist ethics, and there's still a strong reaction and repulsion almost, because of all of the different ways it's been defined in the past, like how feminism has been a bad word, and so I think that it would, like Tom calls for, it would do us well to, I think women well to unify and approach grassroots organizing in a similar and unified way. I also don't think that it's necessarily on the shoulders and burden of the women to do that just in order to get an equal or egalitarian voice in grassroots organizing. I think that there needs to be some openness and education and learning on the other side too. So I can't speak very well to Latin America. I've only studied it a little bit. I've been there, but yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't address that aspect.
But I think Latin America is right now becoming very vibrant once again. In the 50s, there were many grassroots movements in Latin America. Most of them were smashed with the help of the United States, CIA and other agencies. I guess the worst example is, ultimately is Chile, which maintained democracy. But in 1973, there was that bloody coup, and then repression for many, many years. And recently, Chile is now a very vibrant society with blossoming civil society and social movements and political movements. Brazil, of course, has had movements from the below for many, many years. And Lula's party basically is a party that comes out of that kind of movement. In Bolivia also, the indigenous people's movement, Evo Morales. I think Mariko is actually writing a paper on Bolivia, so maybe you should ask Mariko after she finishes her paper. But Latin America, I think, will be a place to watch. And I myself am going to do more work on Latin America. Well, one practical reason is that you don't get jet lagged when you go there. Going to Europe, America, Africa, those places really are quite fatiguing. And Latin America, of course, is a lot of fun. I really enjoy being there, and especially talking to people from all different walks of life. It's a very lively part of the world, among other things, and there is so much to learn. Okay, and I think, again, the same question that Ryan posed about the work he read can be posed about feminist ethics as well, where they are. So I will answer all these questions together. Adrian?
So I did the article by Anne Ferguson on Feminist Perspectives on class and work. And her article came from an encyclopedia. She basically does a very bird's eye view of how work in the labor market for women has evolved in correlation or due to feminist movements, the first and the second wave. With that said, I was a little disappointed by her because I feel like she kind of skimmed off the top, and if you're not well versed in feminism, you're just kind of like, what? So it was like a point by point rather than a deep exploration of what's happened.
Yeah, that's a fair critique, I think.
Yeah. Secondly, she did not address the third movement, which is our most present movement, which I find is the most applicable today, of course. And she totally avoided and skirted the whole issue of gender and queer theory, which is also a good analysis of where we are.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about this so we are not completely blank on this?
Does anyone know about queer theory? One. Okay, two. So now there's the evolving movement to try and reconstruct what it means to be a variant sexual identity or a variant gender identity. And just because there are the categories of male and female, they're set up in a very heteronormative, so it's a very hierarchical architecture of what it means to be male, what it means to be female, what your positions are in society. But when you go against this and you are, say, a woman who you feel is male, so you're a transgender male, where do you fit within this dialogue? How is this dialogue set up in this power structure? So this has really been a movement to deconstruct what we've learned as to be the norm and take the peripheries and reconstruct it. So this movement looks a lot at Foucault and language. And I know the feminist movement looks at that, but they take it even deeper, especially since Foucault was a homosexual male. And just really try to reestablish themselves within the dialogue of feminism and more so expanding from there. So I pulled out a paper called 3 Ways of Feminism, From Suffragettes to GRRLS, Girls, it's the third wave feminism. Unfortunately, the little I've read about third wave feminism, aside from queer theory and gender theory, is kind of surface, to be honest. It's like, we're women, hear us roar, we can get on the internet. Which I think is really actually very shallow. So what I did is I tried to go through how I presented my paper, kind of also the downfalls of presenting Ferguson's paper is the fact that when you try to do a very quick synopsis of even a quicker synopsis of women in work, it becomes this rhetorical phrases, and I could tell by everyone's facial reactions, although I didn't get any questions or comments. It was kind of like, yeah, okay. So it becomes very distilled, unfortunately. And I also wanted to really raise the fact that feminism, like you were saying, has been such a controversial issue, but once you start really digging deeper into what it means to be a woman, what it means to be in this space within society, and then even more within what I found with gender and queer theory, you become really pissed off, especially as a woman. So it's hard to relay that to, not you guys, I think you think a little more about it, but relay it to the common public without being like, oh, she's a bra-burning hippie, or, whatever it might be. So then I go in the end of my paper, and I try to talk a little bit about the Clinton-Palin face of women today, and is that really an accurate representation of how far we've gotten? Yes, it is significant that women can run for these political offices, but they don't really represent the mass majority of women, where there's these tension and issues between the contradictions of unequal pay, social expectations of responsibility within both the public and private spheres, poverty rates of single working mother households. Our politics don't accurately always address that. And that's a very broad statement, and I'm sure that there is definitely arguments against it, but as a whole, our politics are set up in a very patriarchal way. So then I go into talking about how Clinton and Palin try to both portray themselves in a male appearance of traditional, pit bull and fighter, in order to attain this public validity, which I think's awful because it really just embodies these aggressive competition-like appearances, and I don't know, I think that it's trying to go against what a woman should be in order to fit into a male sphere, but what a lot of third wave feminists actually talk about is how to get out of these binary identities of docile aggressive, nurturing just, feminine masculine, and refuse the either or one-dimensional heteronormative paradigms and try to usher in a different kind of dialogue. So that's kind of where I end. Sorry, that was a really long explanation.
Well,
But
that's you raised many interesting points. So, but yeah, Amy?
What would you say to, I mean, I like your description of the theoretical underpinnings behind some of the discussion that we're having of challenging feminist thought, specifically when you're looking at third wave feminism. But what would you say to those who look at the reality of the situation? Like, for example, I know with the French election with Ségolène Royal, a lot of the issue with her was that she was just too pretty of a face to actually do anything in French politics. That was a lot of the critique of her. And also the fact that, she had children and was this home woman. And what would you say to that? I mean, the reality like that, in order for women to be perceived as like actually